Why, hello there. Welcome back to Let's Talk. Today we would like to talk to you all about a little idea that has been floating through our mind for a little while now regarding Warframe, and don't worry. Unlike our previous Let's Talk, we won't be getting too deep or trying to implore people to band together to change a company's mind before it's too late. And spoiler alert, it looks like it's already too late, which we won't lie feels like a massive kick to the nads. But regardless, that's not why we're here today. But rather, it is to talk to you all about these ideas for what could be 2 new potential Warframes which have stuck with us for a while now, and in doing so, generally get your feedback to see if these Warframes and their concepts are something that you would play if given the chance. Now, needless to say, we absolutely love Warframe to bits. We love the various settings. The story more so now the Drifter has entered the fray. The various characters that are so easy to either love or despise, and the lore. Oh goodness, it gets pretty messed up when you delve deeper into it. And if you need an example, the Arakan, who were essentially futuristic slave owners in the lore, turned a pregnant woman into a robotic death machine that went around executing people with a jade light. Yeah, we weren't kidding when we said it gets pretty messed up. However disturbing lore aside, the things we love most in this game is the vast array of weapons and various Warframes you can earn through play. And we could carry on and gush about this game for ages. But to spare you all a 5-hour-long fanboy essay video about Warframe, we'll just move on. Among the many things that truly put Warframe and its development team as a whole on a pedestal for us, besides their commitment and passion to constantly make the game feel more fun and less grindy, as well as constantly improving previous content systems, so that any player new or old that join these modes don't have to spend weeks trying to get their Warframe of choice. And if you've done the Nidus grind, you know exactly what we're talking about. The reason why Warframe is enjoyed by many, besides the obvious reasons such as its varying degree of gameplay modes and stellar build crafting system, it is the actual Warframes themselves. And as of writing this script, we now officially have 60 Warframes in the roster. Yes, you heard that right, folks. That's 60 playable Warframes to experiment with the newest addition to the roster being Temple, or as they are known by their protoframe name, David Bowie. And ladies and gentlemen, you'll be hard set to not find a frame among the cast of 60 Warframes that resonates with you and your particular playstyle. Personally speaking, since her rework, we have thoroughly enjoyed playing the Warframe Nyx, or Eleanor, mainly due to her crowd control capabilities and the fact she can grant 200% critical chance to her weapons at the press of a button, which makes any weapon in her hands a critical monster. Regardless, players can find a frame that they will resonate with and enjoy. For example, do you like being stealthy and striking from the shadows? Then Ash is for you, or perhaps you like to channel the spirit of the Old West and go in guns a-blazing. Well, Cowpoke, let us introduce you to good old Mesa, or mayhaps you just don't want to bother with weapons and aiming and just want to nuke the entire map and move on with your day. In that case, allow us to introduce you to the walking war crime, which is Saren. Or perhaps you always dreamed of having a radioactive codpiece that seemingly breathes for unexplainable reasons. Then Corvex is your Cinderblock. Regardless of your playstyle, you'll find a frame that suits you to perfection. But before you all start thinking that we're sponsored for this video, let's move on, shall we? Regardless, as we look at the current roster, we notice that 2 certain types of frames haven't been created as of yet, and those are an explosives expert or a demolitionist type Warframe, which is all about utilizing the blast element and creating explosions so big that Mr. Torg himself would shed tears of joy while rating them 10 on the badass meter. And the other type of Warframe is that of the heavy gunner archetype, a Warframe that favors heavy weapons and archguns, a true heavy weapons platform that just absolutely cranks up the power of archguns to 100 by supercharging their stats as well as granting varying bonuses to both themselves as well as their currently equipped archgun in order to cause maximum amount of devastation. What we want to talk about is how we would personally approach these 2 concepts and go into detail on their skills, passives, and just how they would generally function. So without further ado, let's start with the first frame, which we rather fittingly named Sarge. Now, the initial idea for Sarge came from playing our favorite character in the first Descendant, which is Asamo. Now, Asamo is by far the most accurate and fun depiction of a Demolitionist, or more accurately, a Explosives masterclass, that we've played in recent memory so far, with maneuverability and just non-stop explosions. He quickly became our favorite for good reason. And shortly after playing him is when we began thinking up Sarge and just how this type of class could transfer into Warframe. However, before we get into Sarge and the kit we thought up for him, let us quickly explain how the blast element in Warframe actually works so that you have a general idea behind this particular element and how it integrates into his kit. Now, firstly, the status effect inflicted by blast damage is called Detonate, which is triggered when inflicting 10 stacks of blast. Detonate will then cause a miniature explosion inflicting 30% of base damage after 1.5 seconds. So for example, if you have an ability that deals 1000 damage at base after inflicting 10 stacks of blast, it will then detonate for an extra 300 damage either when the stacks of blast inflicted on the enemies reaches its maximum of 10 stacks, or when said target affected by said blast stacks dies in combat. And when the target ends up dying in combat, the fuse for these stacks will forcibly end early, and the damage of the current blast stacks that are inflicted upon the target is then dealt simultaneously to enemies within 5 meters, and are dealt 300% of base damage per proc on the target, meaning blast triggered in this way will deal 3000 damage as opposed to the regular 1000. However, the increased damage from this premature detonation will only apply to the surrounding enemies hit by the initial explosion, making it a rather good option for clearing out hordes of enemies. So now that you are scratching your head and wondering what the hell we just said, with a vague idea of how the blast element works, let's get into the stats we have laid out for Sarge. Now, when we started brainstorming Sarge, we knew for a fact that we wanted him to be a health tank frame, taking inspiration from the phrase walking fortress. And while Sarge won't be able to reach obscene health limits in the way Inaros can, he would still be able to go toe-to-toe with some of the more beefier Warframes out there. And so here are the stats we have given to Sarge at max level. Starting with his health, we set it at 2,450 without the use of mods, purely for the fact that Sarge won't have shields, and we gotta make sure he can perform in the endgame content without them. Now, this health value is increased to 6,500. With the use of the full Umbral mod set equipped, this allows Sarge to have more survivability. Then Nidus without his mutation stacks, but not nearly as much as Inaros, who to this very day still holds the title of Mr. Thick. Continuing with Sarge, we set his armor values to 800 at max level, further playing into the concept of a walking fortress, and this value can be buffed up to a respectable 1440, with the complete Umbral mod set equipped, and when coupled with his decent energy reserve of 250, which can be further modded to a juicy 462 with either primed flow or by slapping on arcane battery, which will give him a measly 12 less energy, instead bringing it down to 450. But now having the luxury of saving yourself a mod slot on the build page allows Sarge to use his abilities quite comfortably, which finally brings us to his sprint speed. You know, that one stat that no one cares about unless you are playing either Volt or Gauss. Yeah, we set that to 0.50, which is the slowest among the current cast. And the reason we did that was that while we pictured Sarge being this walking explosive fortress, it just made sense to us that all that bulk and explosive power would naturally come at a cost of their maneuverability. Which, granted, for a game like Warframe that incentivizes bullet jumping and fast-paced gameplay, may seem a bit out of pocket and may not be a hit for some, but honestly, we feel like it adds to the overall theme of what Sarge actually is. Now that we have gone through Sarge's base stats, it is finally time to get into the fun stuff, which is his passive ability and skills. So for Sarge's passive ability, we wanted to keep it simple and synergistic with his skill, and so the passive we chose was: for every stack of blast inflicted on enemies within affinity range, Sarge will gain 20% status damage for both himself as well as his equipped weapons up to a maximum of plus 200% status damage, and while there is an enemy or enemies affected by a blast proc within affinity range, Sarge will then regenerate 2.5% health per second, capping out at a max of 25%. Now you're probably thinking to yourself, dude, that regen sounds pretty broken. And typically, we would agree with you. However, you'll see in a moment why exactly this effect synergizes quite heavily with his kit. So now that we have covered Sarge's passive, it is time to go over his abilities. Starting with his first ability, which is simply called Downtown. Sarge throws a bomb inflicting the blast status effect on enemies within the radius of the explosion. If this ability kills a target with the initial explosion, this bomb will then detonate again, splitting into 8 mini-cluster bombs which then fan out and trigger subsequent explosions. Now, as we thought of Sarge's abilities and which one would be more suitable as a subsume for the Helminth system, and even going as far as to get input from other people, we ultimately decided that this particular ability would be the most fitting as a Sarge's dedicated subsumable ability, and could see it being a fun pick for some Warframes such as Protea, Vauban, and even Rhino. But as fun as it is to picture Vauban and Protea just spamming bombs and wiping out hordes of enemies, it is time to move on to Sarge's second ability, which is simply called Explosions. Sarge roots himself in place and lets loose a large radial explosion at the cost of 50% of their health, inflicting 10 stacks of blast on all enemies hit by the ability, as well as reducing their armor by 50% at base, which of course is moddable by power strength. For Sarge's third ability, we have a unique one in the form of the Smell of Gunpowder in the Morning. This channeled ability lets Sarge emit an area of effect cloud of explosive powder which continuously surrounds him. And when an enemy hits Sarge in this state, an explosion will occur, dealing blast damage as well as inflicting a stack of blast onto the target. When this effect is triggered by either the skill explosions or a weapon modded with either heat or blast, this ability will deal double the damage. Finally, we have Sarge's ultimate, which is fittingly named the Coup de Grace. Sarge brandishes his exalted nuke and begins charging forward, becoming temporarily invulnerable, and after triggering the ability again or running for 10 seconds, Sarge then smashes the nuke into the ground, consuming all of his current HP to increase the damage or the ability. If this ability kills a target, Sarge will be revived and granted 5% health, which is moddable by power strength, returned to him per enemy killed, and with that, ladies and gentlemen, with all these powers combined, you gain a playstyle that not only offers Sarge a genuinely high-risk, high-reward style of play with non-stop explosions. Sarge truly lives up to his theme of being an explosives expert, and with the ability to increase his status damage as well as armor strip, he truly knows how to make the most of his explosive personality. But of course, every great frame needs an equally great weapon. So we decided a rather fitting weapon for Sarge would be an explosive shotgun, which fires micro rockets. At the cost of being quite inaccurate, this shotgun does, however, have a secondary fire mode, which will launch a large explosive shell at the cost of all the ammo in the current magazine. That gains increased damage and explodes in a 10-meter radius. And when this weapon is used by Sarge, it will gain increased multi-shot and reload speed. And so, with that last tidbit, we have finally wrapped up Sarge. However, we aren't done with the video quite yet, because now we would like to talk to you all about the heavy gunner frame, which we have rather fittingly named Torrent. Now, while the general inspiration for Torrent came from heavy gunners like those seen in Warhammer Space Marine 2, a more interesting idea came to mind, and that was, what is the dynamic between both Torrent and Sarge? You see, this question was inspired by the in-game lore of Grendel and Gauss being the best of mates, which led us to wonder how would Sarge and Torrent behave together in the general setting of Warframe. Would they have been friends like Grendel and Gauss? Or would they have naturally been at opposition? An example of this could be that Sarge was of Grineer design built by Til Rigor, hence why he favors explosions so much. While Torrent was designed and made by the Corpus, or more specifically Nerf Anyo, to go against the Tenno. As such, they are constantly being pitted against one another as enemies with the simple goal of destroying each other. So as we began considering their place in the general stage of Warframe as a whole, and yes, we will admit, we did nerd out a bit more than usual while thinking up these backstories. A few examples of some being that Sarge was in search of the perfect explosive weapon during the Sentient War to destroy the sentients. However, in actually achieving his goal and finding the perfect explosive weapon, he ultimately ended up blowing himself up as a result. While Torrent, on the other hand, could have been the leader of the Orokin Vanguard during the Sentient War, continuously following orders all while mowing down sentient drones with her trusty archgun and combat drones, only to end up falling during battle by defying her orders while protecting some innocent bystanders. Honestly, the more we think about their dynamic, the more intrigued we become. However, before we get too lost crafting backstories, let us delve deeper into Torrent and what exactly sets her apart from Sarge. So, immediately as we were theory crafting Torrent, we knew that we wanted her to be the opposite of Sarge. And so in that pursuit, here are the stats that we gave to Torrent at max level, starting with her health, which we set to 500, which can be buffed up to 900, with the complete Umbral mod set equipped. And while Torrent's health is considerably lower compared to Sarge's and can be seen as a significant downgrade, her survivability will be just as good if not better than Sarge. Once we delve into her skills, so next up we have her shields, which we have set to 750 and can be buffed up to 1350 with the addition of primed redirection. This value combined with one of her skills makes Torrent a fantastic shield gating frame, and for those among you who don't know what shield gating is, allow us to explain. So in Warframe, when your frame's shields break, your frame becomes temporarily invulnerable to damage based on the total max of your shield at the time of breaking. So for example, if you have the minimum amount of shields for shield gating, which is like 10 or 20 through the use of mods and specialized gear, you'll then be given 0.33 seconds of invulnerability until your shields refill back to full. However, if you have the maximum amount of shields for shield gating, which is 1,150 shields, you will then be given the full amount of 2.5 seconds worth of invulnerability until your shields regenerate. This allows shield gating to prevent definitive one-shot kills against the players, and offers a safety net against enemies no matter how high in level the activity you are currently facing is. And so with that short and sweet explanation of shield gating out of the way, it is time to carry on with Torrent's stats. And now we are at her max armor value, which we set at 250 and can be buffed to 450 with the full Umbral mod set equipped. However, this value can go even further when her passive ability is active, capping out at chunky 2250 with both the full Umbral mod set as well as her passive ability activated. This leads us to her energy value, which we set to 225, which can be further increased to a rather solid 641 with the addition of primed flow. And provided that our calculations are correct, this can be further increased to a rather sizable 1,800 with the combination of Arcane Battery, the full Umbral set, as well as her passive effect, allowing her to reliably spam her abilities as and when she wants, which finally takes us to Torrent Sprint Speed, which we have set to the default 1.0 sprint speed, which puts her in line with a vast majority of the roster, as we didn't want to make her too fast considering the fact that she will be using heavy weapons and archguns, and having zoom around the map while using such weaponry didn't make sense, even though it was fun to think about. And so having covered Torrent's stats, it is time to delve into both her passive skill and the abilities we crafted for her. Starting with her passive ability. While Torrent has an archgun equipped, Torrent grants herself 1,000 armor as well as granting the equipped archgun an increased 150% damage and 100% multi-shot. And while an archgun is equipped, any ammo picked up by Torrent during this time increases the maximum ammo reserves for the equipped archgun at a 1-for-1 value as the initial ammo pickup, capping out at double of the base ammo maximum amount of the currently equipped arch gun. So for example, if we take the basic Imperator arch gun, which everybody has, it has an ammo maximum of 800 at base. So when this passive is then capped out, it will then increase that ammo maximum to 1,600, vastly increasing the use time of arch guns during missions. This passive, combined with her skills, which we will go over in a moment, allows Torrent to turn any arch gun into an absolute monster. So it is time to jump into said skills. More notably, her first ability, which is called a Barrel Full of Fun. Torrent instantly reloads her equipped weapon and temporarily supercharges it for a duration, boosting its critical and status chance by an additive amount. So for example, if you have a weapon that has a low critical rate, such as the 3% critical chance from the standard Nucor, this ability will then grant 50% critical rate to this weapon, meaning that the Nucor will now have a base 53% critical rate. Outside the use of mods, these critical rates and status values can be further modded through the use of both power strength and duration mods. This ability effect is doubled for any equipped arch guns. Now, when we were thinking of which ability would be the best for the Helminth system, this ability stood out to us the most, as currently, we do have a melee equivalent of this ability from the Warframe Coup in the form of his Wrathful Advance skill, which after use buffs melee critical chance by 200% after use. And we thought that having an ability that did the same thing but for guns would be pretty remarkable, especially for gunrunner frames like Saren, Mirage, and Rhino. And in keeping with that theme of gun running, it is time to talk about Torrent's second ability, which is called Plentiful Reserves. Torrent summons a mobile supply drone called Mags for a set duration, which restores ammo directly into her equipped weapons magazine at a rate of 20% of the current magazine per second, as well as restoring 10% of Torrent's health or shields with the highest value taking priority. This ability has double the strength when Torrent has an arch gun equipped, and the duration of this ability can be further increased through the use of mods. And so, as you can see, ladies and gentlemen, with just Torrent's first and second abilities in combination with her passive skill, severely increases the usability of arch guns as a primary damage source, not only by fixing their rather poor ammo economy, but also by granting them increased damage values and important supplementary stats such as critical rate and status chance in order to increase their potency in high-end gameplay. And we still have two of her abilities yet to cover. So let's get to it. So getting into Torrent's third ability, we have a fun one in the form of Suppressive Fire. Torrent summons her trusty assault drone called Lucy to fight alongside her, and any kills or assists gotten by either Torrent or Lucy during the duration of this ability increases her equipped weapons damage by 5% per kill up to a max of 100%, as well as grants 5% of the equipped weapons magazine size into her ammo reserves. The bonuses granted by this ability are doubled if Torrent has an arch gun equipped. Finally, we have Torrent's fourth ability in the form of Hold the Line. Torrent calls in Lucy and Mags to help her secure the objective. Torrent then roots herself in place, becoming temporarily invulnerable. While in this mode, Torrent gains 100% ammo efficiency and 100% fire rate for her equipped weapon, including arch guns, for a set duration. Any kills or assists made by either Torrent or Lucy during Hold the Line will further increase the fire rate bonus granted by this ability by 20% up to a maximum of 300%. And with that, ladies and gentlemen, we have wrapped up Torrent, and in the end, we are presented with the ultimate heavy weapons platform. A Warframe that turns arch guns from a fun and goofy flavor pick during your everyday missions into something truly special, with increased damage, multi-shot, critical rate, status chance, infinite ammo both in and out of Hold the Line, as well as obscene levels of fire rate for maximum DACA during your missions. Torrent truly lives up to her name, because when she wields a firearm, her enemies can expect a torrent of bullets coming their way. But before we sign off for this video, we would like to cover one last thing for Torrent, and that is her dedicated weapon. Now, coming up with a dedicated weapon for Torrent was a bit trickier compared to Sarge, and not because it was difficult. No. In fact, it was the opposite. It was quite easy. The real challenge, however, came from the amount of ideas we had regarding her dedicated weapon. At first, it was an arch gun that behaved like a minigun. With a rather low base damage of 50, this arch gun would get stronger the longer it was fired, capping out its damage at 2,500 without the use of mods, and when it was wielded by Torrent, this weapon would gain 50% ammo efficiency. But then this idea branched off into other fun ideas as a result, such as a multi-barreled missile launcher, which would be very reminiscent of the OG Rhino from Ratchet & Clank. This arch gun would launch micro-missiles which would explode in a 5-meter radius in its standard fire mode, but when you use its alternate fire, you then lock on to a target in your crosshairs, and upon releasing the fire button, let loose a volley of rockets which track the target. And then this idea inspired an even more fun weapon for Torrent in the form of a giant laser cannon, which honestly was inspired by one of our favorite weapons in Warframe, which is the Opticore. Because let's face it, if the Soma can have a bigger sister in the Phaedra, then this particular weapon can be the mother of all Opticores. Honestly, if we had to choose just one of these ideas to be her dedicated weapon, then it would probably more or less be the laser cannon. Because let's face it, ladies and gentlemen, nothing screams badass more than a heavy gunner wielding an even heavier laser cannon into combat. And so, with both Torrent and Sarge theory crafted for you all, we're curious, what are your thoughts on these two frames? If these concepts ever made it into the game by some miracle, would they be frames that you would pick up or even play? Let us know in the comments below, as we're quite curious about your input regarding these two. But until next time, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to sign off here and let you enjoy the rest of our infested lich boss fight. And until the next one, ladies and gentlemen, we hope you all take care, stay safe, and we'll see you all in the next one.
Sadly, this will be our last song tonight. Just hear it! Wait performance. Just because someone appreciates music doesn't mean they can make it. Good night. The best on you! I am wary of people. Value admiration. Everything else. Music is truly a universal language. This will be our last song. Become alive, be my melody on board. Somebody out die. Sing the song and you feel it in the floor. You own our contracts, not our souls. It was a disappointing performance.
Space is silent again, as it should be. Let us